Okay, so I'm just going to close out these folders that we don't need to see because I don't want to clutter up my left-hand side menu, which has our project. Okay, so now we need to create the SERP template. So since we're pointing it to the SERP directory, and then in the SERP directory there's SERP HTML, let's go ahead and create the SERP directory inside of the templates folder. So this will be SERP, which again stands for Search Engine Results Page. And inside of the SERP folder, we're going to create a HTML file also called SERP. Okay, now you know the routine. This is curly brace % extends main.html. Then we can say open curly brace and %, say block title. And we always need to remember to close the block. And in here, we can say recipes for, and then open the double curly brace and say query to print out the query here. And then we can create the block content. Whoopsie daisy. Content, and close this tag, and also close the, or provide the end block. Okay. Okay, so this will be very familiar to what we have already done. So I'm going to say div class container, just to give it that delimited width instead of spanning through the entire width of the screen. And now I'm going to say div class row. So I'm going to create a row, and inside of this row I'm going to print or create a h2, so a header 2, and I'm going to say recipes for, and again query. So the same as the title. Okay, so now we need to open up our for loop. So this will be open curly brace and % for, and we'll say recipe in recipes. Okay, we need to always remember to end the for loop. Okay, now we can actually start creating our multiple snippets. So div class snpt for snippet. And inside of this div, we can create another div, which will be the container for our image. So this will be div class snpt image, so snpt-img. Okay, and inside of this container, we will create a link because we want to wrap our image with a link. Okay, so whenever the user clicks the image, they will actually go to our recipe. So let's say ahref / recipe.doc_id. Okay, and we will give this a tag, a class of img container. Okay, and inside of this a tag, we're going to create a image tag, so img src for source. And here we can go ahead and say recipe.photo_URL. We need to index into the first item, so the index0.value. Okay, and the style is, we're going to provide the style, so the style is going to be width of 100% and a height of also 100%. Now, you may be asking, why do we need to index into the first element of the photo URL field, whereas we don't need to index into the first element of the doc ID? Well, let's go back to our recipes model. And here is where we're actually putting the document into the search API index. So let's see what's happening. Doc ID is a unique identifier for the document within the index. So what we're doing here is we are providing the ID of the recipe that we just saved to the data store. So like this, we're assuring ourselves that it's always going to be unique for every new recipe we insert into the data store. As a side note, what would happen if we actually put a ID here that already exists within the search index? Well, what would happen is that Search API would go ahead and overwrite the document with that ID with the values that we're passing in this document, okay? So you have to be careful with that, but we're playing it safe here because we're using a ID which is always going to be unique for the recipes because Datastore is generating it, and it knows, or it generates unique IDs for its own purpose, so we can just use that ID and we know that it's unique, okay? And we don't need to index into any kind of, element in the doc ID because it's simply not a list. It's a string, so we don't need to index anything here. So we can just grab it by itself. The other fields are returned as a list by the search API. Now, this is because we could potentially add some more options into our search queries, which could potentially return more items for each field. So this is why we always need to call the field and actually index into the first item. Okay, we're not going to be using that functionality, so we will always be indexing into the first item, so the index 0, and then we just need to call the value. So like that, we're pulling out the value for this field for this document. Okay, good. So now we have our image. We can go ahead and actually create our title. So we can create another div. So div class snpt-title. Okay, this is another class I created. And then here we can create a h2. And inside of this h2, we can create a tag, another link, so that again, whenever the user clicks on this title, they go to the recipe. So we can say /recipe. / and again recipe.docid. Okay, and here we can, for the title, we can simply use the recipe title. So we can say recipe.title. Again, we need to index into the index 0 and call the value. Okay, so that's our title, and now finally we can create the actual snippet. Okay, that search API is returning. So we can say div class snpt ingredients. This is another style I created, and we can also create a link, the same as always, pointing to /recipe /recipe.docid, okay, doc_id, and here we can print out the recipe.expressions and index into the first item .value. Okay, now why are we indexing into some kind of expressions field? Well, this is because here we are declaring or defining that we want a returned expression, and this returned expression is going to have a name of snippet, and the expression is going to be this expression here. Now, since it's a returned expression, the search API is going to return it inside of the returned document as a expression field, right? So and since we could actually ask it for multiple expressions, it's a list. So that's why we need to call the dot expressions and then index into the first item, okay? And then simply call the value, okay? So let's go ahead and actually see if this is working. Okay. And we need to type in this address manually for now. So we need to go to our localhost port 8080 /search, because that's the path to the request handler. And then we need to add a question mark, which basically says that this is the end of the path and now begins some parameters we're going to be sending the application, okay? So the parameters we're going to be sending is one called Q, and this is because in the SERP.py we are fetching the parameter Q, okay? And then the value of this parameter, so I'm just going to search for olives. Okay, this is looking kind of, too wide, so let's see. Well, it's working at least, but it's too wide. So let's see where we went wrong. So let's go back to our serp.html, and the problem is that we didn't add a call LG3 here, okay? So now if we refresh, we see that it has the correct size we want it to have. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. And again, we see that the snippet is clickable, the title is clickable, and the image is clickable. Obviously, if we click, this won't work because we still haven't implemented the recipe page.